Well, with us now from Washington is Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse. He's written a new book. It's called The Vanishing American Adult, Our Coming-of-Age Crisis and How to Build a Culture of Self-Reliance. Senator, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. Good to be with you.
You know, this book, was something jumped at me. You're talking about these young people, and they just don't really want to work. But you had an example. They were decorating a Christmas tree, and they could get to the lower level of it, and then they walked away and said, well, the job's done. Well, half of the tree that they couldn't reach wasn't decorated. And that sort of speaks to the whole culture. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I was 37 when I became a college president, and I didn't think of myself as that much older than the undergraduates at our school. But I quickly realized that one of the most basic differences between me growing up in the 1970s and 80s and a lot of the students that were entering college the last few years is when I was in high school, everybody I grew up around, whether they were going to college or not, and everybody that I got to college with, whether they'd come from a poor family or a working class family like mine, or if they were wealthier, they had all worked before. And the vast majority of kids entering colleges today have tended to grow up in households that are so insulated from work that they often just haven't had the experience of developing a work ethic. Well, what I found at this, the story you tell about the Christmas tree, is we had a big athletic arena at the college that I was president of. About a 20-foot Christmas tree was to be set up around Thanksgiving for the Christmas holiday that year. And our students, and these were strong and able, vital and vibrant students, they were supposed to decorate the Christmas tree, and they ended up decorating the bottom 8 feet. They used up all the decorations, and then they were leaving. And one of the vice presidents of our college walked by, and she said, "What's going on here, guys?" And they said, "Well, we didn't know how to get any higher, so we just decorated the bottom, and we used up the decorations, and we're done." And she said, "Wait a minute, did maintenance refuse to bring you a ladder?" And it turned out none of them had even thought to ask. They just didn't take the next step of problem solving. And I think we have a lot of kids right now that we're stranding in Neverland. We're getting them stuck in perpetual adolescence, and it's not good for them, and it's not good for us in a republic. We need to do better by the kids.
Well, what's the answer, do you think?
I think one thing is we need to celebrate scar tissue more with our kids. When you're growing up, there are all sorts of things that happen as you're taking off the training wheels as you go through adolescence. You know, it's important to protect little kids when they're, you know, at a stage of dependency. But as they migrate toward adulthood, our goal as parents and as grandparents and aunts and uncles is to help them take off the training wheels so they can become independent, so they can live a life of gratitude to God by trying to serve their neighbor and do meaningful work in the community. And a lot of that growing up, a lot of those rites of passage, a lot of that coming of age involves some scabs and some scar tissue and some tough love. And right now, I think we're doing a bad job as the parents and the grandparents generation of trying to protect our kids too much from a lot of the character building grit that comes from those transitional states. Scar tissue is the foundation of future character, and we're not celebrating it enough with our kids. They can be resilient, but we need to help them know that they can.
How about all this minimum wage? You know, when I was a kid, I worked on a farm, and I got paid, I think, 15 bucks a month. And I mean, I was working. You talk about work. You start at 5:30 in the morning, and you knock off about 9 o'clock at night. I mean, it was tough work, and I was just a kid. But I got $15. I mean, what is this stuff if they have to get $15 an hour or $13 an hour minimum wage?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I wrote The Vanishing American Adult primarily to be constructive. 1/3 of the book is looking at this problem of perpetual adolescence, but 2/3 of it is about what habits can we help inculcate in our kids. And you point to one of the central ones, which is, as parents, we need to have a theory and a plan for how we're going to help our kids get a work ethic. Because most kids don't grow up around farms anymore. Where I'm from in Nebraska, we still bus kids out in the summer to the fields to detassel corn. So there are some of those opportunities in parts of the country, but most American kids are growing up in suburbs now, and we, the parents, need to plan to get them a work ethic, and that's what The Vanishing American Adult is really about.
Well, let me show this book, which is available right now wherever books are sold. It's called The Vanishing American Adult. Let me ask you, you know, I hear Chuck Schumer speaking, and I would think that hell for him would be to listen to the nonsense that he speaks over and over and over again for all eternity. Why do they want to attack everything the president does?
Well, there are a whole bunch of people in Washington, D.C. who are confused, and this is probably true in both political parties. They get confused and they start to think that Washington, D.C. is the center of the world. And we don't believe that. Christians don't believe that, and Americans broadly don't believe that. But unfortunately, 5 of the 7 richest counties in America now are the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where the lobbyists live. You've got Manhattan, San Francisco, and 5 counties around Washington, D.C. A river of money flows to this place, and that's not what the founders intended. The American people believe, like the founders believe, that whatever small town or whatever urban ethnic neighborhood you're living in, whatever suburb you live in, you're supposed to think that's the center of the world, because that's where you work, and that's where you worship, and that's where you're joining the Rotary Club, and that's where you're raising kids. That's supposed to be the center of the world. And we have too many politicians that are confused, and they think that heaven can come by politics in Washington, D.C., and it's not true.
You're absolutely right. 3 big things. You got tax reform. You've got the Obamacare repeal and replace,
right,
and you've got the budget. Comment on how are we going to handle that?
Yeah, so Washington is not very good at telling the truth about long-term problems, and all 3 of those that you name are big and long-term problems. So maybe just a brief comment on each. American healthcare is one of the only sectors of the economy where we don't get higher quality for lower cost over time, and we should ask why that is. It isn't because we have too little government. It's because we've already had too much government perverting our healthcare delivery system and trying to get in the way between doctors and nurses and their patients. So we need to do healthcare reform that actually tries to put doctors and nurses and patients and families back in the center of the equation. We need to have a system where lots of Americans know they've got insurance against a catastrophic event. But mostly, we don't need more government intrusion in the healthcare system, and that's why we need to repeal and fully replace Obamacare. Second, on tax reform, there are so many loopholes and carve-outs and special exemptions for the lobbyists and the politically connected and the powerful. And what the American people want is a simpler tax code. We could lower the marginal rate as long as we would carve out lots of these loopholes and carve-outs for the politically connected. The American people know that Washington exists to provide for the common defense. The American people want to pay their taxes that go to the troops and go to national security, but there's just so much muck and slosh around this place. We need to do fundamental tax reform. And then third, you point to the budget. You know, this is a city that hasn't done honest budgeting for 4 decades now. 35 of the last 39 years, less than 30% of all federal spending has gone through the budget process. Almost every year, these people get to the end of the fiscal year. They get to September, and the government's about to shut down, and then they scream that the only 2 choices are shut down the government and fund nothing, or grow all government spending another 2 or 3% next year. That doesn't make any sense. I'm one of 5 people in the U.S. Senate that's never been a politician before. As you mentioned, I was a college president before, and that's why I wrote The Vanishing American Adult, because most of the important questions in American life are upstream from politics. We need politics to do a smaller number of things, and we need a budget that reflects a politics that does a smaller number of things, but the more important things more urgently.
Well, Senator, I appreciate that. The wisdom as you're showing, and may your colleagues acknowledge some of it as being the gospel truth. Well, the book is called The Vanishing American Adult, The Coming-of-Age Crisis and How to Build a Culture of Self-Reliance. You can get that book at your online or at your bookstore.